Namibia's new and first female president has made history against the United States now, and it has Donald Trump on the edge. He slammed the doors on Africans. For years, the United States humiliated African citizens with endless visa delays, denials, and disrespect, all while enjoying VIP access to the continent, with no visa required. Americans could fly into African countries like they owned the skies. No questions, no queues, no shame. But that era is ending, and Namibia just made it official. Under President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, the message is clear. If Africans need a visa to enter America, then Americans need a visa to enter Africa. No exceptions, no hypocrisy. However, Trump hasn't taken the new policy seriously until now. This week, over 500 American nationals were ordered to leave Namibia immediately for violating the country's new visa regulations. They didn't apply. They didn't respect the law. And Namibia isn't here to babysit U.S. tourists. But here's the question. What exactly did these Americans do wrong? What violations pushed Namibia to take this unprecedented step? And will Namibia deport them if they did not leave on their will? Let's find out. It's official. Namibia has flipped the immigration policy. No longer will American citizens stroll into Namibia visa-free while African travelers to the United States face humiliating rejections, months-long delays, and dehumanizing interviews. Starting April 1, 2025, Namibia has declared that if Africans need visas to enter the United States, then Americans will now need visas to enter Namibia. No more free passes. No more imperial courtesy. The announcement, made by Namibia's bold new leadership under President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, marks a historic shift in African diplomacy. It's not a reaction. It's a statement, one that echoes across the continent that Africa will no longer bow to double standards. Previously, Namibia had been among the many African nations that allowed American travelers in without visa requirements, a diplomatic courtesy the U.S. never reciprocated. It was too arrogant to understand that Namibia was doing it as a favor, not because it wanted American tourists. Being more arrogant, America ensured Africans and Namibians were treated unfairly, so they would know they were less important. For decades, Namibian citizens were forced to endure layers of red tape just to visit America. Meanwhile, Americans could mine diamonds, run safari lodges, or conduct business in Namibia with barely a stamp on their passport. That double standard has now expired. The new Namibian policy introduces a visa-on-arrival system for U.S. citizens, requiring them to pay roughly $90 at entry points. But even more importantly, the government is conducting a sweeping crackdown on Americans already living in the country illegally or without proper documentation. As of April, over 500 American nationals have been identified and ordered to leave for violating visa procedures or overstaying their permitted time. And they are not just tourists. Many of these individuals were reportedly involved in Namibia's mining and extraction sectors, extracting uranium, diamonds, copper, and rare earth metals without valid work permits or proper immigration clearances. For years, they operated under the radar. Now, the radar is locked on. Immigration officials have already begun serving deportation notices. Law enforcement has been brought in to ensure the process is carried out in full compliance with Namibian law, but with no compromise on sovereignty. It's a new era of discipline, where even Westerners will no longer be shielded by their passports. That's because President Nandi-Ndaitwah made it crystal clear that this is not an act of hostility. It is an act of fairness. If our people need visas to go to Washington, then your people will need visas to come to Windhoek, she declared. It wasn't said in anger, it was said in dignity. And to make her vision even clearer, the president announced a complementary policy that will go down in history. Namibia will be making the country visa-free for all African nations. That's right. While Americans must now apply for permission, Africans are being welcomed freely. Because Africa isn't the problem, Africa is the solution. This bold move is part of a broader Pan-African vision to promote unity, intra-African travel, and trade. It's about turning Africa from a fragmented continent of 54 checkpoints into a borderless home where African passports matter, where no African is treated like an outsider in Africa. Globally, the response has been split. Pan-African activists and African citizens are applauding Namibia, calling it the long-overdue start of reciprocity and resistance. But in Washington and certain European capitals, diplomats are quietly panicking. Because if Namibia can do this, who's next? As Namibia asserts its sovereignty, a bigger question looms. Is this the beginning of Africa rewriting the rules of international respect? Will other African nations finally start demanding reciprocity from the West? Or will this act trigger backlash and economic threats from countries used to unchecked privilege? Either way, the message is loud and irreversible. Africa is no longer begging. Africa is building boundaries, and Namibia is leading the charge. But why did Namibia target the US first? Well, because enough was enough. For decades, the United States has treated African travelers like criminals in waiting. A Namibian entrepreneur applying for a US visa faces background checks, interrogations, proof of funds, and a near 50% chance of being rejected, not because of criminality, but because of nationality. Entire families have been denied access to the US for weddings, funerals, conferences, or even life-saving treatment, all while American tourists flew into Africa visa-free, as if colonial entitlement was still the global default. Namibia decided to make an example, and America was the perfect one. Why? Because no other country has benefited more from Africa's generosity while offering so little in return. America has operated diamond mines in Namibia. Its mining giants have extracted uranium for decades. Its corporations dominate tech, telecom, and agriculture partnerships. And its citizens? Many live in Namibia without even a visa. They blend into the wealthy enclaves of Windhoek or operate tourist businesses in Etosha, all while Namibians struggle just to secure an entry stamp into the United States Embassy in Pretoria. This imbalance wasn't just visible, it was insulting. When President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah stepped into power as Namibia's first female president, she made it clear, Namibia would no longer be a playground for unequal diplomacy. Her administration reviewed all visa agreements, and what they discovered was shocking. That was that American citizens had more access to Namibia than Namibians had to anywhere in the West. And yet, those Americans weren't even complying with immigration rules. The 500 Americans ordered to leave Namibia weren't just tourists overstaying their visas. Many had entered without any visa at all, exploiting the old loophole of visa-free entry and the lax oversight from previous governments. Some were working illegally. Others were involved in resource extraction, unlicensed business operations, or shady missionary activity with no accountability to local law. And here is something shocking. When these individuals were asked to retroactively apply for proper work or residency visas, they were denied. Not because Namibia was punishing them, but because they failed to qualify under Namibian immigration standards. That's when the president stepped in. She ordered immediate deportation proceedings, sending shockwaves across diplomatic channels. Yes, the same country which is deporting people from its country will now see its citizens being deported. Embassies scrambled. Lobbyists panicked. US officials asked for leniency. But Namibia refused to flinch. This wasn't about individuals anymore. It was about dignity. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Namibia wasn't just targeting Americans to make a scene. It was calling out hypocrisy. The United States demands full compliance with its immigration laws, and deportations are standard procedure for undocumented immigrants. But when Namibia applies the same rules to Americans, suddenly it's seen as controversial? That double standard is exactly what Namibia is tearing down. And here's where it gets deeper. Unlike many African countries that fear Western backlash, Namibia stood firm. It didn't bow to diplomatic pressure. It didn't apologize. It reminded the world of something simple and unshakable, that reciprocity is not revenge. It's respect. If an American cannot walk into Russia, China, or even Brazil without a visa, then why should Africa, the most exploited continent in modern history, offer open arms to those who won't do the same for its people? Namibia's decision wasn't emotional. It was strategic. It sent a message to every embassy, consulate, and government across the globe that the old days are over. Africa will no longer be your free vacation. Africa will no longer welcome your unchecked privilege. Africa is no longer your open gate unless you open yours. And America just became the first to feel what that means. The moment Namibia made its move, the West panicked. Embassies in Windhoek became active with urgent memos. He was fighting for sovereignty, the kind Africa was denied for over a century under colonialism and now under diplomatic hypocrisy. And if the West thought they could scare Namibia into retreating, they clearly didn't know who they were dealing with. Namibian officials reminded the world that every nation has the right to enforce its own borders, something the US does daily with full aggression. And yet, when Namibia did the same, the West called it hostile. That contradiction is the very heart of this policy change. Why is it acceptable for the United States to detain African students at airports, delay visas for months, and fingerprint applicants in embassies, while Americans walk through African borders with no questions asked? Namibia had an answer: no more. And that answer didn't just shake the US, it shook Europe too. Germany, a former colonial ruler of Namibia, reportedly reached out to assess whether the visa policy could extend to EU citizens. They were told, reciprocity is our foreign policy. If Germany's citizens enjoy open access here, Namibians expect the same in Berlin. Now, after Trump has been humiliated, how will the US retaliate? The headlines out of Windhoek were sharp. Namibia to deport 500 Americans. US nationals ordered to leave. Reciprocity demanded. And behind those headlines, an uncomfortable reality settled into the US diplomatic machine. For the first time, an African country wasn't asking. It was telling. And Washington didn't like that one bit. Privately, US State Department officials are scrambling. The tourism angle? They can survive that. Diplomatic friction? Manageable. But the symbolism? That's nuclear. Namibia just set a precedent, a very dangerous one for the global status quo. If one African country can make Americans stand in line at the immigration counter like everyone else, what happens when the rest follow? This demands retaliation from the US because that's what a helpless country does. When a country like Namibia dares to say no to the United States, especially on something as symbolic as visa reciprocity, Washington rarely takes it lying down. On the surface, official US responses may remain calm, even diplomatic. But beneath that polished exterior, retaliation is often swift, strategic, and surgical. However, Namibia does not care, because that's enough. It was ready for it. One of the most immediate weapons at Washington's disposal is economic aid. Namibia receives millions in US-funded support every year, especially through flagship programs like USAID and PEPFAR, the US President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. These funds aren't just symbolic gestures. They support HIV/AIDS treatment centers, agricultural development, educational scholarships, and local health systems. If the visa standoff escalates, the US could suspend or slash this aid under the familiar excuse of reassessing partnerships. On the surface, it would appear as a recalibration of priorities. But in reality, it would be a punishment. However, Namibia was prepared for this as Trump hinted at ending USAID for countries. But retaliation doesn't always come with headlines. Sometimes it comes in silence. The US could begin quietly downgrading diplomatic relations. Planned meetings could mysteriously vanish from calendars. Embassy staff might be reduced, and Namibian officials applying for US visas might find themselves stuck in bureaucratic quicksand, flagged under vague administrative review categories that never quite get resolved. These tactics don't grab global attention, but they do send a message to African nations. challenge U.S. supremacy, and your leaders will be made to wait outside the door. Washington could also reach for trade as a tool of coercion. Namibia benefits from preferential access to U.S. markets under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, a policy designed to boost African exports. That lifeline could be severed. If tensions rise, Namibia could be threatened with suspension from AGOA under claims of non-cooperation or obstacles to American business interests. Even more dangerous, the U.S. might not act alone. Washington could quietly lean on its institutional allies, the European Union, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. Loans could be delayed. Infrastructure funding could be stalled without clear reasons. Development deals might vanish. And multinational corporations with American links could be encouraged to rethink investments in Namibia. But here's the twist. Every one of these potential retaliations would only strengthen Namibia's argument. Because if a nation gets punished simply for demanding equal treatment, then what exactly does that say about Western values? That message, obedience over fairness, is now being broadcast loud and clear across Africa. And that's where this could backfire, badly. Africa is not the same continent it was 20 years ago. Today, it is increasingly looking east, toward China, Russia, BRICS, and internal alliances built on sovereignty, not submission. If the U.S. lashes out too harshly, it won't just be Namibia that walks away. Other nations, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, and Kenya, are watching closely. If they see Namibia survive U.S. retaliation and still stand tall, many may follow suit, demanding visa reciprocity and rewriting the terms of engagement with the West. So, yes, the United States might retaliate. It might cut aid, delay visas, throttle trade, and turn global institutions into weapons. But in doing so, it may trigger exactly what it fears. A continent no longer willing to beg, bow, or wait for permission. Because if one small country can say, enough, and survive, what happens when an entire continent joins in? And this time, the blowback may not be something Washington is ready to handle, and Namibia knows it. So, will the U.S. retaliate? Maybe. But Africa has seen retaliation before. It has seen coups, it has seen sanctions, and it has seen threats. What it hasn't seen enough of, until now, is unity. And Namibia just lit that fire. What do you think about Namibia's new president's policy of requiring visas from Western countries to enter the country? Isn't it true that all African countries should treat the Western tourists accordingly, so they know how unfairly Africans are treated? In the comment section below, share your thoughts on how Trump will respond when he knows that 500 Americans have been deported by an African country. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.